Hey, as per usual in some of my videos, this is a disclaimer that the B-roll footage is not going to be relevant to what I'm talking about. This is like an audio-only video, more similar to a podcast. I'm going to have some B-roll footage of my Mario 3D Land retrospective that you can find available on my alt channel, Nintendine Plus. Feel free to check that out if you're interested in that, plus a whole bunch of other 3D Mario retrospectives. How's it going, everybody? If you happen to be a gaming fan, especially a Nintendo fan on YouTube these days, you might have noticed there's a general trend along what's going on in the Nintendo circles amongst the influencers. Many of these channels have spent the past 5 or 6 years making a living off of fake direct rumors, pointless top 10s lists, or clinging on to whatever leak they can in order to deliver out a 8 to 10 minute video every single day, so they can prey on an audience's excitement because Nintendo takes forever to deliver any news, and even then, the news they often deliver is not really worth anybody's time. This was very evident post-pandemic during their days of the rumors leading up to a Switch Pro, which eventually evolved and became the rumors about a Switch 2. And naturally, during that entire window, Nintendo influencers were doing very well. And it's mostly because Nintendo as a company had a massive fandom and a massive following online. The idea for many of these influencers would eventually they would continue to monetize off of the hype leading up towards the launch of the Switch 2, and then following the launch of the Switch 2, they would be able to carry on and enjoy a whole other console generation of made-up rumors, fake leaks, and all around preying on the unassuming Nintendo fans that needed attention from somebody big because Nintendo was not acknowledging them. Now, most of these influencers prior to the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 were very critical of everything that was going around the company. Be it the game prices, the console's performance, even the console prices to an extent. They were very much being critical because, well, that's what was getting them clicks from the month of April up until the launch of the console. And as we all saw, and it kind of became very clear to us on the day that the console launched, all of them not only purchased the Nintendo Switch 2, but they also immediately became major fanboys for the console. This of course happened because they saw that the pre-orders sold out, and then the launch units sold out, so their assumption was that the online circles around the Nintendo fandom would very much be welcoming discourse about Nintendo with open arms in the same way that it was welcomed with the Nintendo Switch 1. Basically, since the Switch 2 sold out, the influencers decided that they as well would sell out. And for a very brief moment, it kind of worked. Through the months of June and July, maybe even early August, you could be fooled into assuming that the positivity around the Nintendo circles online was just going to go back to what it was during the later half of the Switch's generation. I actually made a few videos back then discussing this, about how you would be clearly making a lot more money if you were a positive Nintendo fan, as opposed to somebody that stuck to your boycott and decided to go up against the company. My views were tanking. Obviously they were, because most people that wanted to see Nintendo stuff were just excited about the consoles, and everybody else that had hope of some kind of backlash or boycott taking place just to see a shakeup in the industry had effectively moved on because they figured everything was back to business as usual. Now in my case I didn't mind too much because I've done YouTube for about 4 or 5 years now, and I was getting 400 or 500 views a week for a solid 3 years. So when my channel slowed down and I was getting fewer than 8,000 or 9,000 views a video, that didn't really bug me. But people still assumed that I needed those 8,000 or 9,000 views to pay my rent. And so I figured, news was slow, there was nothing more to talk about. Let me talk about the fact that if you were somebody that was pro-Nintendo after the launch of the Switch 2, you were clearly doing better on YouTube, and at the time, that was completely true. Now, obviously, it didn't take long for all of that to collapse, and most of that was because of Nintendo's September Direct. Perhaps the worst Direct since, I don't know, maybe the one with the Wii Music? Any and all hype that had been built up for the past 3 years as people anxiously awaited for every drip-fed announcement leading up to the reveal and launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 basically got swept away. It is not a coincidence that that last September Direct was the last peak of Nintendo's shareholder value, and it's more or less been downhill ever since with a few rises along the way. Following the September Direct, largely because there were no good games announced, and also because Nintendo decided to add on DLC to every frickin' thing that they had imaginable, while also deciding that their major 3D Mario title that people have been dying to play was Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, re-released on the Nintendo Switch in a combination package of $70, which meant that if you wanted a physical copy of Mario Galaxy 2, and if you're somebody that already owned Mario 3D All-Stars, you were forced to buy another copy of Mario Galaxy 1 in addition to that. There were more egregious things to come out of that direct, but that was probably the biggest one. Obviously, not too long after that, you end up hitting a Pokemon release, and when Pokemon comes out, nobody online likes Nintendo, even if they're not part of the Nintendo circles. And then you move on to the holiday season, where pretty much every single country in Europe saw a massive drop-off in how many Switches were sold in comparison to what the Switch 1 was able to accomplish in its launch year. And likewise in the US, where the combination of November and December was either the worst or the second worst holiday season that we've seen from Nintendo ever since the launch of the Switch 1. I believe in the case of November, it was actually the worst November that we've seen from Nintendo since the Wii U days, but even back then the 3DS was doing great. And likewise for December, it was the second worst December that we've seen for Nintendo as far as unit sales are concerned, with the worst one being last year's, where the Switch was 7 years old, so it wasn't really selling much anyway. Basically, what ends up happening is you go through a holiday season where nobody really cares for positive videos about Nintendo. There's a very small minority of the fandom that is still enjoying the games that are coming out and playing them. Kirby Air Riders was very niche. Metroid Prime 4, everybody hated the game. Pokemon, it's Pokemon. So pretty much every single Nintendo influencer was struggling. And unfortunately, they rely on this content to pay their bills, because these influencers are full-time YouTubers. So even if they were appealing to a small audience of 2,000 or 3,000 people, maybe even 5,000 people if they're lucky, it just was not enough. There isn't a large enough audience of people that are satisfied with Nintendo to enjoy their content, and that's largely because Nintendo has completely betrayed their fandom. And even if they did not betray everybody, they're not releasing enough enjoyable games for them to want to see content about it. So it just became a very bad time to be a Nintendo influencer. Now the problem is these influencers, they need to find a way to get engagement. They need to find a way to get more views. They need to find a way to keep the sponsors knocking on their door, and most importantly, to pay their bills. And very likely the easiest thing for them to do would be to simply speak out against Nintendo. It's not like they haven't done it before. They made a crap ton of money in the latter half of the Switch's life when they kept insisting that the console was dead and was slowing down and was too weak and we needed a Switch Pro now. And likewise, they were adamant about making videos about how egregious Nintendo's prices were leading up to the launch of the Switch 2. So it's not like they're opposed to criticizing Nintendo. Some of them even famously called Nintendo liars because they took away game sharing. But the issue is, what they did not expect to happen was after the launch of the Switch 2, a lot of the backlash that people had towards Nintendo actually ended up carrying on for a few more months. Right, they realized that not everybody got the memo. Some people actually did not buy the Switch 2 and actually stood by their beliefs that Nintendo was charging too much money in all of their games and consoles and the other stuff like bricking and banning, trying to force digital game key cards, forcing you to agree that you cannot sue them if they wrong you. You know, all that fun stuff that everybody does, so who cares if Nintendo does it? So naturally, what ended up happening is these influencers that did not get the memo and continued to fight up and rise up against Nintendo resonated with the majority of the Nintendo fandom, or at least the Nintendo fandom online. There were, and still are, people out there that felt they were hard done by Nintendo, and they really want the company to actually have to face this animosity and hopefully be humbled so that they can change their focus and try to please the fans instead of operating with the assumption that there's blind consumption among the fandom, lacking all respect for them and assuming they're all just sheep that are just going to consume whatever they put out. And when they're done consuming that, they're going to consume the next product with no questions asked. And those people that have continued to push on against Nintendo have been very comfortable. Similar to the pro Nintendo channels, when there's a lot of stuff to talk about with Nintendo, their views go up. And likewise, when you get slow months and there's nothing really worth it to talk about with Nintendo, their views go down. But the difference is the floor, the baseline, the interest of the community for the people that are pushing back against Nintendo and have been doing so since for the past 8 months has obviously not fizzled away because the majority of the Nintendo fandom is still very much in this backlash in hopes that they will accomplish something. And even for those that have lost hope, they find that it is nice to see so many people out there that they can connect with and reminisce about a time when Nintendo used to be better for them. Because obviously it's not just about Nintendo, right? It's about corporate greed in general. It's about the way that the world is now versus the way the world used to be. Back in the day, companies used to pretend they like us. You know, the dollar has always been the bottom line. That's a reality. But the companies used to pretend to like us. They used to say the customer's always right. But now they view everybody as cattle. And the expectation is whatever slop they lay out for you, you're going to eat it right up. And you're going to do so on their terms. So since the majority of the Nintendo's online community still feels this negativity towards Nintendo, which ultimately is a positive thing because it means that they have integrity and they have a backbone, what ends up happening is these positive Nintendo YouTubers now, these influencers, they can't simply just pay their bills by making reviews for video games because Nintendo's not releasing video games, and they can't just trick people into falling for their fake rumors and leaks and directs anymore because the reality is most of the fandom is kind of just fed up with this BS, either from Nintendo or from the influencers themselves. Perhaps I need a whole separate video to talk about fake rumors and fake directs and falling for artificial hype online. That might be another topic for a different day. But ultimately, that type of content is just not quite paying the bills anymore. So in the past couple of months, maybe 2.5 months, these influencers realize that they want to use negativity to grow because they think that negativity is their path to success. But instead of directing that negativity towards Nintendo, a massive corporation with no face that has been milking them and most of their viewers dry for the past decade, and that's why so many of their viewers are not there anymore, they instead have opted to direct that negativity towards the negativity that's against Nintendo. And the problem with this is that it's not paying off. It's just not worth it. Because ultimately, unless there's like some kind of beef that sparks up and two people are going back and forth and they're both massive names in the community, which doesn't really exist in the Nintendo circles, most people don't really care for that type of content, especially Nintendo fans. Because you gotta imagine, gaming is a niche. And a niche of that niche is Nintendo content. And a niche of Nintendo content is daily Nintendo news. And a niche of Nintendo news is negativity against the company. So if you're making negativity about those that are being negative against Nintendo, there is such a small audience of people that are actually interested in hearing you talk about an influencer that it's almost a guarantee that your channel will not take off in the way that you expect it to at that point. Because the reality is whichever YouTuber that's negative that you decide to go after is not big enough to get you the view count and the clicks that you were getting back prior to the launch of the Switch 2 where you were lying about direct rumors. The audience is just not there. Now, if you had two massive YouTubers going at it, that would be a different story. But I'm talking like if Wood from Beat 'em Ups and Arlo decided to go back and forth. And honestly, Arlo might not even be big enough here. It might have to be like Wood versus Scott the Woz. Right, like if you get to that level of fame where those two guys on a random video where they're not even thinking about what they're saying are getting 300,000 plus views, then sure, the drama can stir something up and they can enjoy it. But going after an influencer that is either critical against Nintendo, or there's somebody that uses AI thumbnails of Mario crying, or they just enjoy laughing at Nintendo fans, or they just hate every single Nintendo game that they've played in the past 3 years, going after those people is just very uninteresting to the masses. Taking them down does nothing because they are not big enough to make an effect on the industry in general. Right, like imagine you're making a video where you're criticizing the president of the USA. That's huge. In this case, the USA is Nintendo. There's basically nothing bigger you can criticize in that circle. So it gets clicks, it gets interests, etc. And then in response to that, somebody that's not really that relevant in general makes a video about that person who's criticizing the president of the US. Unless that person is like Stephen Colbert, the reality is nobody is going to care. It's just a random dude complaining about a greater power that none of us have any control over, like Nintendo. And to be clear, I'm making this video not because I want to go after these Nintendo influencers. I'm making it because I received a lot of very good advice from YouTubers over the past few years, and I'm thinking it might be worth passing some of that forward onto them because I know a lot of them watch my content. The first and most important thing is that you need to make content that you actually enjoy. If you're not doing that and you're getting desperate and trying to find ways to make content that would garner clicks, that vibrates to your listeners. They feel it. They can hear it in your voice. And it's just not very interesting to them because it feels fake. It feels like you're trying to feed them something that they want to eat rather than something that you wanted to cook. And that will give you some form of success, but if your love is not in the recipe, it ain't gonna taste that good. The other bit of advice that I can provide for them is to try and focus on the audience that started watching their channel in the first place. So in their case, they were making Nintendo news for Nintendo fans. And right now, obviously, there are very few Nintendo fans available. But if they genuinely believe that the Switch 2 is going to come back and it's going to rise up and everybody's going to turn the tides and we're all just going to wither away eventually and people are going to go back to how they were during the Switch generation, then they shouldn't compromise what made them big in the first place. Keep doing the content that you are doing, and your audience will remain there and continue to watch. You'll have some ups and you'll have some downs, and if you're in the right and it's successful, and you genuinely believe in the content that you're bringing out, eventually, that success is guaranteed to follow. Wasting your time making content about a fairly small YouTuber in hopes that you'll go viral because you're attacking them should be, in theory, beneath you. At least I would assume it would be beneath them. But even if it's not beneath you, the numbers don't really lie. Nobody really cares about anti-Nintendo content. People are upset because the Nintendo space online discourse sucks, and they bought a Switch 2 and they want to be happy about Nintendo. So you need to make that content for those people. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is either somebody completely new is going to come in and take over that space while you're too busy looking over your shoulder at the negativity dudes, or if Nintendo was to eventually falter and actually have to drop the price, and suddenly those negative guys end up buying into Nintendo and start making the content themselves, that audience is going to go to them. And that's probably the last thing that you would want. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for you to do to succeed on YouTube, whether it's a Nintendo influencer or anybody in general, is to enjoy the content you make. If you are too hyper-focused on the view counts, you won't succeed. And I think that's true in every subject, in every topic along the entirety of the YouTube space. I've obviously intentionally left this video as vague as possible, just because I'm not really interested in attacking anybody, but I hope it's able to help some of these anti-Nintendo YouTubers that ultimately feel like success on this platform is becoming hopeless for them. If there's one thing that I've learned from my past 4 or 5 years on YouTube is that there's always an audience for content creators that are actually passionate about what they do. And maybe when you started off, you had that passion. For your sake, find it again and build off of that. In any case, for everybody else, thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.